Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we are going to discuss a LinkedIn post from a guy named Alex Auerbach, who's also in the sports psychology field. And he had a post about boredom. And we could talk a little bit about that post and sort of use it as a little bit of a starting point, launching off point to talk about this topic, I think, a little bit more broadly. But in the post, and we can link to this in the show notes so that people can read it themselves if they're interested. He talks about the the necessity for boredom in terms of high performers being able to I guess, embrace that boredom of sort of the monotony of the repetitiveness of the day to day actions that take place in any athlete or performer's life. So talking about being able to not only deal with that boredom but find ways to really connect that boredom to your purpose, right? Sort of finding the purpose in whatever boring activity that's happening and connect that to some sort of larger purpose for that individual. So I think there's a lot that we can dive into here, and again, we can sort of use this as as a little bit of a starting point. And I actually wanted to read just one, I guess it's two sentences from it, where he talks about the aim is to find the meaning in whatever that work is, to recognize that dealing with things you don't want to do, to recognize that dealing with things you don't want to deal with is part of what it means to become great at something. So, talking about how by dealing with some of the boredom or dealing with things you don't feel like doing, that leads to that greatness and that leads to excellence through doing boring things well and being great at connecting some of those boring tasks to more of a deeper purpose. So I think it's definitely an interesting topic that we can talk about from some different angles and bring up different sorts of experiences and how they connect to this. But wanted to see some of your thoughts on this topic, Brian.
So I think it is a good topic because um, even though Alex is addressing this more from the professional athlete, because he works a lot with pro sports teams, and that this can become a barrier as careers move on. They get tired of practice, tired of the little things, tired of the repetitive days. I think even though that's the where he's going with this, there's also for all of us, there are parts of our practice or training that we might find boring. Mini
Yep.
tennis, maybe simply doing cross courts and down the line drills. These could be considered mundane. We've been doing them. If you've played it for a longer period of time, you've been doing them for years, and it's easy to overlook them, to not put in the effort to them. And I think this is where the word purpose is very, very important. And I think of this almost like in the micro level, it can be looked at as what we're doing actually at practice and the little things. And then at a macro level, it's sort of like, all right, my days are boring. If you're maybe a junior, training, or a college player or a pro, same thing, day after day, week after week. And how can we learn to embrace sort of that mundane lifestyle? And for some of us, it might be sort of almost monastic, um, but maybe it needs to be in that regard if that's the path you're on. But even if you're just somebody who is a club player and you like to play leagues or you play with your friends, there are probably things that you do every single time that could be done maybe with more engagement. And I think that that's really the thing here, Josh, is how do we learn to become more engaged with some of these things that we might, quote unquote, call boring or mundane. And I think that's part of the gist of our conversation today.
Yep. Yep. No, I agree. It's okay. You know, these mundane or repetitive activities, right? Maybe it's, before practice, maybe it's stretching before practice, maybe it's mini tennis, maybe it's something that takes place after practice, like, whether it be some sort of stretching or recovering or foam rolling or reflecting on that day's performance. But, you know, can we first of all change the way that we look at it and maybe understand the purpose behind it, understand why we're going about this, right? We're not just spending time doing a dynamic warm up just for the sake of doing it. There's reasons related to injury prevention and or injury reduction, I guess I should say. Um, your muscles are going to feel more flexible, more nimble. You're going to be able to be faster ultimately, more agile. So I think that is an important step in terms of understanding why, where, somebody is going about this. Sometimes there are coaches that say like, oh, because I said so, or parents, for that matter. So I think, being able to explain the why, especially maybe to a junior athlete, I think is really key. But for adults, being able to understand, okay, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is the purpose behind the activity, even if it feels like I've done this dozens of times before, hundreds or thousands of times before. There is a reason for this. And yeah, instead of just going through the motions, maybe it's something like mini tennis, right? And so, I think for a lot of people, they do just go through the motions during that part and sort of just view it as a necessary part of warm up, where instead it can be, okay, there's a reason why I'm doing this. Pros do this. When you watch pros do mini tennis, they tend to do it really well, right? So, okay, so for those non-pros, can they recognize the importance of it, connect that to purpose, and then, really try to approach that with their full focus and engagement, which I think is often lacking from people in those situations.
So let's stick with the micro piece, Josh. You were just mentioning some good reasons for why we should do a dynamic warm up. It's some science-based reasons for that. It can be injury reduction, as you said, or injury prevention. It makes our muscles feel better. We're getting warmed up. I think even from a longer term perspective, though, it's something that is going to make us feel better overall in the long term if we do this consistently. And dynamic warm up, similar to some other aspects of getting ready for a match, are easy to blow off. Just like, a lot of habits they're easy to do, but because they're easy to do, they're also easy not to do. And so the more we understand the benefit, the value of the activity and really connect with that, the better we'll do at, the more engaged we'll be. We often talk about mini tennis, how when we watch players, they're less than engaged in that. There's often, poor footwork and not a lot of intensity
Yep.
going into it. And it's almost like it would be better off not doing it if that's the way you're going to approach it. And so, all right, what is the benefit of engaging with mini tennis? So if you really engage with that and use your feet, now you're beginning to warm up your footwork patterns. If you're hitting through the ball as you would, with a full stroke, obviously you can't hit it as hard, but you're beginning to warm up, your muscles and joints that help you hit the ball correctly. You can also be warming up seeing the ball. One of the activities I ask players to engage in is something from Jackie Reardon's book, Mindset, the zooming exercise, meaning we really like zoom in on the ball all the way from our opponent's racket or our training partner's racket all the way to mine and then back, right? So you're warming up your eyes in that regard. You can be warming up how you're feeling the racket in your hand. So another good concentration exercise of really feeling the looseness of your grip. There's so many things that one could engage in that mini tennis time, that 3 to 5 minutes, that are going to have a huge benefit not only to your day, but as you get better and better at these activities, they're going to benefit your overall game. So I think that when we look at the micro stuff, it's really trying to understand, well, why do we do this? And you mentioned the coaching part earlier. A player may not know why we do this. Great question to ask. And it's not being, sort of insubordinate to say, why are we doing this? It's actually a really good question because if you understand the why a little bit better, maybe you'll be more engaged with that activity. And it shouldn't be, well, that's just the way we do things. It's like the worst answer ever. Whether you're in tennis or a corporate environment, we don't want to let that kind of be the answer. So I think, at a micro level, there are a lot of mundane things that we do that we repeat practice after practice. Your goal, I think, is to increase engagement. The way we increase engagement is by understanding why we do these things, how they benefit us today, and maybe how they benefit us in the long term.
Absolutely, and I think you gave some really good examples there, within the micro of yeah, what players can do to, during maybe certain more mundane or repetitive moments, and they come up in all different areas of life, right? It could be in a tennis practice, it can be, it can be in the workplace, it can be in all different areas. So, I think that's really important, and we can certainly dive into sort of the macro in terms of maybe a player's journey, and in over the course of a year, over the course of a career, because I think there's a lot there. I would even say within a match, there's certain things that might be seen as mundane. Maybe it's somebody's routine, right? When I go over the in between point routine with certain players, one question I often, we'll talk about it. I'll ask, how comfortable they feel with it. Do they feel like they remember some of the different steps? And then I'll say, okay, well, how often do you, like, if you could put a percentage on it, what percentage of the time would you say you're using it? And I think it's very rare that people get, especially in the beginning, that people are close to 100. It's often, maybe 30%, 50%, 60%. Okay, well, that's a start, right? That's better than never doing it. But what would it take to embrace the repetitiveness, or the mundaneness of using it all the time, not just using it on a break point, not just using it when you feel like you're about to break your racket, or you're about to swear at yourself, or yell at yourself, but what would it take to really use it as often as possible when you're winning by a lot, when your opponent is winning by a lot, when you're in a practice tiebreaker, whatever it is, what would it take to, for you to use it more and more and more? And I think a huge part of that is embracing that repetitiveness and understanding that, okay, that's going to happen, right? It's not like, it's going to feel radically different each time. But I think the point of, especially on the micro side, of being able to really be consistent in that way, and consistently approach each of these situations with, with that full engagement and connecting it to our purpose, is that really does separate us from the rest of the pack, because most people frankly aren't doing that. Most people are not able to be consistent in that way. Aren't, most people do get bored and do de-engage, and disengage in those sorts of situations. So I think if we can recognize that this is a really critical aspect of greatness, if we can recognize that this does separate us from others, I think it really helps us connect to that greater purpose of, which I know we've talked about, being, working towards being the best player that you can be. And I think if that is the goal, this is an important step towards doing that, because it's a step that other people aren't taking. And it's I think other people aren't taking it because it's hard. it's hard to be consistent point in, point out. It's hard to be fully engaged and dialed in during mini tennis and zooming in the way that you talked about. It's hard to be consistent and use that dynamic warm up every time you play, not just some of the time. So I think, yeah, and I think Alex brings this up too. That and I like this quote. He said, "If it was fun 100% of the time, everyone would do it. Everyone would be great." So that really is the truth, right? If mini tennis and dynamic warm-ups and journaling after practice were were always fun and exciting, then everyone would do it. But the fact is that that not everybody does it. In fact, most people don't, or most people go through the motions in those moments. And yeah, I think it is really an aspect that can really separate people.
I think Alex is also addressing the fact that the answer to boring and mundane tasks is not to make them more fun. That sounds alluring, but then you're constantly changing and chasing something that is difficult to attain. And instead, the real answer is determining purpose, determining the purpose of the activity, but also determining the purpose of the activity toward your goals or the things you want to achieve or your overall goal of becoming the best player that you can become. I think, the path to being truly great at something is being able to find a system that works for you and then to repeat those those tasks. And I do really, I really connect with this idea of purpose, Josh. And maybe this is just like a personal example, but I remember some years ago, maybe like 2019, I was having tendonitis in my right knee. It was very, very painful, and it was really preventing me from playing. So I went to a physical therapist, and because of my schedule, my optimal time to go to the physical therapist was actually in the middle of the day. So I would go, and there were at this physical therapy place, there were a lot of people who were, late 60s, 70s, maybe early 80s there, all struggling with mobility issues. It kind of opened my eyes. I'm like, this is not where I want to be when I'm in my 70s or 80s. I want to make sure that I'm staying mobile through the lifespan as much as possible. So, it was in that moment that I decided to start doing, some daily mobility things. I started doing partner stretching once a week, all in this kind of purpose of staying mobile longer, right? So all of my sort of discipline around physical energy, the purpose is to have a better quality of life now, but also as I continue to get older. So yeah, there are times, Josh, in the morning where I'm like, oh, do I really want to do this? Kind of, my daily mobility, but then I reconnect with no, this is why you feel good. This is why you feel good. You need to do this. It's 10 minutes. Go through it, do it the best you can, and know that you got, some more reps on the way to feeling good. You could say the same thing about stuff like meditation or anything that you're doing day to day. Can you connect it to a larger purpose of, whatever your goal is? In part, one of my sort of goals is to be mobile and energetic through the lifespan. Um, and so that's how I approach, my daily energy activities, eating, moving, sleeping. It's all about that purpose. It's not just about, I just do this because I'm supposed to do it. I do it because I know it makes me feel better and that's a larger purpose. And I think if we look at, say, the aspiring professional player or the aspiring college player, or someone who just really takes their tennis seriously, their days may feel mundane because they do the same thing over and over again. I was having this conversation with one of my clients who trains overseas, and he was noting that every day is the same. But he wakes up, goes to practice, eats lunch, practices again in the afternoon, does some homework, does some recovery, goes to bed, then wakes up, and it's the same thing
Yep.
day after day after day. It's almost a monastic lifestyle. And he's noting that, hey, it's becoming a little bit boring. I was like, well, that's really interesting because, Josh and I are actually going to coincidentally talk about this topic tomorrow, which is now today, and how this is really important. And so, the answer I think is again connecting to your goals. So we talked about what his goals were. He has, some very specific goals with respect to where he would like to play college tennis, and then beyond. And the more we can see like that day-to-day activity being, this is why we're doing it. Okay, maybe it is a little bit mundane, but then we bring it back to the micro, like we are talking earlier. Let me get more engaged with each of these things. Because I think the more engaged you are, Josh, maybe it's not so boring anymore. When I do mini tennis now, I'm super engaged in it. I'm really trying to see the ball. I'm really trying to move my feet. Everything I'm doing on the court, I'm maybe more engaged than ever, just because I'm connecting more and more purpose to what I'm doing. And it's the same for my days as well. My mornings are the same every day. My evenings generally are the same every day. There's a purpose to those bookends that I know is going to lead to longer quality of life, for whatever remaining years I have here. And so the more we connect what we do with a purpose, a larger purpose, I think the better we can withstand the boredom. And maybe we can get into this a little bit. I won't go too deep here, but it feels like in today's world, our tolerance for boredom is less than it used to be.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to. I think you brought up a lot of important things there, but I wanted to talk about that last point, and I agree with that. I mean, I think there's different reasons for that. Whether it be social media, right, and somebody's watching a 1 minute, 1 minute video or 2 minute videos, and as soon as they get bored of it, what do? They swipe to the next one and they swipe to the next one. And not only is our attention span, dwindling in some way, but our tolerance for that boredom, and I think, I would say social media is part of that, is dwindling as well because as soon as we get boredom, as soon as we get bored, we're able to swipe or, we're waiting in line, um, doing an errand or doing something on a day-to-day basis. And what's in our pockets? Our smartphone. And tough to be bored when there's, dozens of apps and all your emails and all your text messages and your various social media platforms and, different games on there. And it's, yeah, I would agree with that in our society, there is less tolerance for boredom. There is just less time where people are doing nothing because we're kind of constantly occupying our attention with these various tasks. So when there is a task, let's say related to tennis or outside of tennis that feels repetitive or boring, it can be easy to, to try to avoid that. Maybe avoiding it means that we're just not going to do it. Maybe avoiding it means we're going to do it, but we're going to kind of go through the motions and not fully be present or not fully engage in that. And yeah, I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think, yeah, being able to, to connect to our purpose, but I think finding ways to be as clear as possible about what that purpose is. Maybe that means journaling about that on a regular basis. Maybe that means having that purpose written down somewhere where you can very clearly see it. Maybe it means being able to set goals in connection to that purpose, in connection to sort of your aim and your vision for where you're going. But yeah, I would agree that I think in today's society, it is harder and harder based on, based on some of those other factors.
Yeah, I think we have so many ways to stay entertained, which is sort of the opposite of being bored. Um, so a couple of books I wanted to bring up, Josh, that are more on the topic of boredom than they are on tennis. But there's a book called Bored and Brilliant, which really talks more about the value of being bored, having fewer inputs with digital devices and allowing your mind to wander more, to give it more space to, in a way, kind of like brainstorm and create ideas. Sort of like one of the last places we have to do that for many of us is like, I'm sure this is true of people listening. You probably come up with some of your best ideas when you're in the shower. And it's hard to, look at your phone in the shower. You're finally giving yourself the space to let your mind wander and create. So there's a lot of value there. Another book is called Lead Yourself First. So written by a federal judge and a West Point graduate. And part of their philosophy for being a good leader, and really leading yourself first is time for solitude. To take that time to be with yourself. It's okay to be bored, no inputs, and just be more self-aware, reflect on things. And that might be the time to connect with purpose there. So those are two books I would recommend on this topic of bored and solitude and understanding why you do things. Um, I really think that this is something that if you really want to be great at what you do, the more engaged you are in these little activities, but the more engaged you are with your purpose
Yep.
each day, the better chance you have. Because even though, Alex Auerbach wrote this post in terms of in his years of working with pro teams, he saw this as maybe a career killer for some. But if we look at some of the athletes across different sports who have played into their late 30s, these are the ones who did all the little things with excellence. So if we think about like a Novak Djokovic, he has been so disciplined about things like stretching and eating, the little things to recover. All those top pros are Nadal, Federer, that they were all great at that. And a Kobe Bryant, same thing. They did. I mean, he's getting up. There are times in his career where he would practice at midnight. There were other times in his career where he would practice at 3:30 or 4 a.m. This and he would do it all the time. Why? Because he knew that this was where greatness lied. This is where it resided. And if I do those things, the things that others are not willing to do,
Yep.
and I think that's also a challenge maybe that we have to put out there for the listeners is that it's also not easy to be the nonconformist. It's not easy to be the only one really paying attention in mini tennis. Not easy to be the only one who is doing a thorough dynamic warm up for an adult league match or I work with a lot of women who play in adult leagues during the day. And, I would say probably the norm there is if it's a 9 o'clock match, they're probably getting there somewhere between 8:45 and 8:55. There's no room there for a really proper warm up. But some, in the ones that I talk to, we talk about, all right, can you get there a little bit earlier or can you do stuff at home? Can you be the one who really takes the time to get yourself ready there, even though the majority of other people aren't doing it? It's so easy to fall into what other people are doing or not doing. And that's why it takes, I think, some guts, takes some courage to be the nonconformist, to be the one in a way who's showing the way. Can you be the example? That's another way maybe of looking at it, Josh, is can you be the example for others here? Can you be showing all these people what they ought to be doing,
Right.
not by telling them, but by leading by example in these things? Another great purpose, right? being a great leader on a team or just being a great leader within, say, your academy environment, wherever that is, can you be the one showing the way? Can you be the exemplar of how we should do things if we're working toward a greater purpose?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think to me, a big part of this, especially, sort of within that micro piece, within that sort of day to day piece of this, is self awareness, right? Can we be aware enough to really recognize whether we are simply going through the motions or whether we are fully engaged in a moment? And I would say for, just about everybody, it's not a necessarily a black or white thing. Like we're always
Yeah, it never
fully
is, right?
engaged.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Or we're always, going through the motions, just kind of doing it. But I think we can work on building that skill of self-awareness through things like mindfulness, through other, other strategies as well. But I think we can, over time, we can be better and better at recognizing, okay, am I able to be aware and notice whether I am doing this activity with the presence and engagement that I want to have? Can I be aware enough and mindful enough to recognize whether my warm up looks the way that I want it to? Can I be aware enough to recognize where my thoughts are while I'm doing an activity? Am I, are my thoughts present? Am I am I noticing what's happening in this activity in this moment, or am I somewhere else? Am I, thinking about something that's happened in the past? Am I focusing on what's happening later today? Right. And I think once we can build that skill of self-awareness, and again, I think things like a daily meditation practice can help a lot with that. Again, when I think one of the barriers to that is that boredom that a lot of people face, or sort of it feeling mundane and monotonous and repetitive. But I think something like that can actually really help us here, because it helps us to be be aware of the moment and take everything in, right? We're able to notice, instead of just going for a walk and being lost to thought, we're able to take in everything that we're seeing, right? We take in the trees and the sounds and the different senses, and fully take in that experience. So I think that, sort of training in that way leads us to be able to, have more awareness of ourselves in some of these key moments, to recognize if we're going about an activity in the way that we want to or not.
So if I were to sum this up, Josh, I think I would bring this back to understanding the necessity or purpose of mundane tasks. The tedium of greatness is really lies in that, the mundane, the simple, the boring, and that's the foundation. If you think about it, a lot of these things are the basic skills.
Yep.
And the way forward is always to connect what you're doing to its own purpose. And if you don't know what that is, ask. And then connecting that to the long-term purpose of whatever your goals or, becoming the best player you can be or something else, like I mentioned earlier, wanting to feel good as I get older, the bigger purpose. If you can be connecting those things on a daily basis, then you can live that lifestyle. You can continue to do the things that you know are right. Of course, like we just said, a lot of these things are easy not to do. They're easy to do, which makes them easy not to do. And if we want to truly be great, we want to make sure that we're engaging with these easy, simple, boring tasks as much as possible and know how they serve us. What would you summarize it differently, or is there any other last thoughts you'd like to leave the listeners with?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of those key things. I like that you said, if you don't, with what the activity is, let's connect it to its purpose and then connect that to your larger purpose, right? And I think if you don't maybe have that, I think then that's a really important step to spend that time going through that, trying to establish, okay, well, what is that for me? And I think there are a lot of people that maybe aren't as clear about what that is. So I would say, that is a really critical piece here, so that it helps sort of give you that guiding light, whether it's something in tennis, whether it's something, as you mentioned, with your own life, Brian, outside of tennis, from sort of a quality of life standpoint. I think the more clear we can be about those things, it makes some of these other decisions a lot easier. It sort of becomes a filter for which we put some of these other decisions, right? If my big picture, goal and why is that I want to, be fit and healthy as long as I can possibly be. It makes it a lot easier to make certain decisions in terms of, okay, well, when do I want to go to bed, or what do I want to eat, or do I want to do that 10 minutes of stretching each morning? It becomes a lot easier to make those decisions, and those decisions, it's easier to get into habit and routine in that way. So I think, yeah, finding that why and spending that time going through that process, right? It's not necessarily just an easy process where you snap your fingers and it's clear, but I think, yeah, spending the time doing, going through that process, I think is really key, and that can change over time, right? What your why is now can change over a period of time, but I think it makes it easier to connect with any particular activity that you might be doing, because it becomes a lot more clear in terms of you know in terms of the reason and the benefits for ultimately doing it. And again, it's not, as I think we both said in different ways, it's never a matter of, oh, just do this because, or just do this because I said so, or because this is the way we do things. I think it is important that you understand, the purpose of it, and sometimes it is about sort of creating that purpose for yourself, creating that purpose for what the activity itself is, and then also your bigger picture purpose. So I think that's an important aspect of it, especially if some people haven't maybe you know fully determined that for themselves.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you are enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. And you can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.